I've had my concessions with Space Marine 2, and I still do. But the dev and like this senior dev does have good points. He's like, look, he commented in an asmongold video, look, I just want to make good games. And for some reason, this made him persona non grata in the entertainment. So now you have all sorts of journalistic outlets talk shitting on him, talking about him. For some reason, it's like we live in an age where wanting to make a product for the consumer makes you a bad person for some reason. Again, it's a reason why no one really cares to explain. It's just like, look, I just want to make a game. Well, we're not. You're not allowed to, apparently, right? It's something that you just can't do. So for that, no, I can recommend Space Marine 2. Look, people will make purchases even out of spite nowadays because they're sick and tired of these ideological possessed weirdos that again they use ideology to uplift themselves and they try to spread it to everybody else, right? And this is done like at the detriment of the consumer. And now we live in an age where people are just like, no one's saying anything. We're just voting with our wallets. And as we see with, certain games that we don't need to go over, you know what I'm talking about. That's working. Certain games that exist to just suck up government grants, ESG money, investor money, failing, and games that actually have some level of artistic intent and understanding what the consumer wants, they succeed. And you have many things in between, but again, it's not anything we really need to go back over now. But Space Marine Devs tells industry to do better. Yes. And we've seen this with Baldur's Gate 3, right? And people are like, oh, you shouldn't compare games to games like Baldur's Gate 3. It's like, why? Why not? I mean, this is the consumer mindset. The consumer value is okay, better games exist. Why the fuck do we have goofy ass games like Duskborn, right? Why are we about to have a Ghost of Tsushima game that's going to fail, right? Like, why do we have these things that aren't going to sell? Like, we know these things don't sell and they're not going to sell because of why they exist. And this is my definition of woke. It's the intent. If the intention of the game is not to be good but to be a rant that someone has instead of, actually having good mechanics, then that's pretty fucking woke. So let's get into it.
I can't believe it. A Space Marine 2 developer just stepped forward and just gave away the secret on how to make a successful game. Get this. They said, just make a good game.
Yeah, it shouldn't be difficult, right? And again, what's the definition of a good game? Well, nobody knows, right? But again, I think the intent behind it can make it a good game even if it's not popular. If you're not just trying to make a mass produced product like the Black Ops 6 game, right? And I've heard this because actually following and talking to developers on Twitter, you get access to streams of information that normal people don't. Like, I was told that companies are being told not to think of games like genres anymore. Like, games should have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, that, and something else. And it's like, why? Like, again, the consumer does not reflect this. Like, I can play all sorts of games if they look interesting. And obviously there's games I don't care about. Like, I don't care about over glorified walking simulators like Alan Wake 2. I don't really care for mini zombie games with the exception of, what was it? Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. Don't care for Black for Blood. But again, this is the mindset, and there are other developer mindsets that existed in the past, right? How games were so bloody fucking easy. Like the first Bioshock, when you face the Big Daddy, you could just keep running at him, beating him, dying. You respawn, running back at him, beating him, dying. And you'll eventually be able to kill him. And again, this was the mindset back then that the consumer should play all of the game and they shouldn't be gated away because of difficulty, right? You know, again, there's these developer mindsets and these industry mindsets that, again, are counter with the consumer, and you, the consumer, aren't told this, right? They don't care to tell you how the product's being made. They impose these things on you.
You know, with as many failures that we've seen in AAA, I'm surprised that none of these companies haven't just folded. Begged for mercy. Gamers! Gamers, I'm so sorry. We need your money. We're going broke. We're going to go back to doing what we were supposed to be doing in the first place. We've seen colossal failures to epic proportions, likely to the tune of billions of dollars wasted over just the last couple of years, and this year's not even done yet. Looking at you, Dragon Age. It's such a good time to be a gamer. The best games are succeeding. The worst games, the soulless attempts at stealing our money, are falling flat on their face. Developers are out there pushing back against societal pressures and just focusing on making great games because that's what matters to players. But there are those that are out there that just don't understand what's going on. They don't see the differences between games that succeed and games that fail. They don't understand what it takes to make a successful game.
Yeah, and they do this because they close their ears off to everything else, right? We're talking people who, we're not talking, people in these companies that play games. We're talking with people that are salesmen, people that go into the industry because they've seen the money, they see the popularity, right? And maybe a couple of them play games, and then you have the developers, right, that, do the coding, but most of the people that make the decisions aren't gamers. And I think we're going to go back to maybe not the golden age of gaming, which was in pre-2010s, but maybe another gaming renaissance. I'm going to call it the silver age of gaming, where you'll have Activision, you'll have Microsoft, you'll like, these things will exist. Companies that just shill out products that's just exists to compete, and there's always going to be this small demographic that buys into them, like EA and NBA or FIFA games. But you will have games that just are just pure peak, and they peak because they renounce DEI, they renounce consultants, they renounce Sweet Baby, right? And people will buy these games out of spite, and then they'll end up just being good games, and they'll probably be like indie games or Eastern developers. And I'm calling it right now. We will enter a silver age of gaming. I don't know. Maybe next year. Give it 2, 3, 4 more years, right? And Ubisoft's probably going to go under, or they'll probably, fire a lot of people. Then they'll end up becoming maybe a AA company and putting out IPs that people want, or you'll have YouTubers or people that have their own side or individual projects that, again, people will watch, people will see, people will consume, just to move away from AAA game companies and just that type of entertainment as a whole.
Lucky for them, Space Marine 2 developer has stepped forward to shed some light. But before that, today's sponsor. New World Eternum just launched on consoles, and it's already making waves. It's available now on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC. If you love action RPGs, then this is something. Grab it on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, or PC, and dive into the adventure. It's been a rocky couple years for the AAA industry. Ubisoft has completely collapsed upon themselves, unable to turn a profit since Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Xbox's Redfall failed and Starfield didn't connect with their audience. Sony stumbled all over themselves with Helldivers and brought us some of the best months of memes with Concord. But I want to make something clear. There will always be games that fail. Market conditions change, players' taste change, trends die out. There are a lot of reasons outside of a game being categorically bad that can cause it to fail, and while those outside factors may be the case with some games, I don't think it's the case for many of the games that we've been seeing today.
Yeah, I mean, again, we had bad games even the pre-2010s, 2015s. Yeah, you know, they're bad games. I've even played some on stream that people agreed were bad, but you know, you look at the shit we have nowadays, and you're like, okay, maybe Sonic 2006 wasn't as bad as I thought, right? You know, that they were bad, and then you have games like Deadly Premonition or like Fate of the Druids that they were garbage, but they were interesting enough, and they have this odd cult around them because I guess they were appealing somewhat, maybe, right? And you have a lot of like indie games that come out. You know, you have games that like Warframe, which will always have a presence, right? And again, I think Space Marine 2 again is a leader in the silver age of gaming. You know, games and developers that just renounce the way the game industry is now, and you know, they just make good games.
Recently, in an article written by Wesley Yin Poole of IGN titled Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 devs says big budget games are failing in part because teams are overscoping their projects. Great games do well. Wesley spoke with Saber Interactive Chief Creative Officer Tim Willits about the issues that the game industry is facing today and the success of Space Marine 2. Wesley writes, Concord, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, Star Wars Outlaws, Final Fantasy 16. The list of big budget video game failures is growing longer each month, with AAA publishers struggling to make a dent in the dominance of older, more established players in this most brutal of markets. Throughout it all, massive hits have come out of nowhere. One of those is Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, developed by World War Z and SnowRunner studio Saber Interactive and published by Focus Entertainment. Of course, Space Marine 2 benefited from the strength of the Warhammer 40k brand, which has been carefully managed by Games Workshop and is about as big as it's ever been. But still, Space Marine 2's breakout success came as a surprise even to its developer, as Saber Chief Creative Officer Tim Willits told IGN in a recent interview. As the video game industry comes to terms with high-profile failures of the likes of Concord and Suicide Squad, what enabled Space Marine 2 to succeed? Both Concord and Suicide Squad took years to develop at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars, and launched into genres some say gamers had long since moved on from. It is Saber's biggest ever video game undertaking and took 4 years to develop, a significant cycle as far as AAA production goes, although, as we've seen with Concord and Suicide Squad, hardly an outlier. Indeed, we've seen huge hits from video games that have had similar long developments. Arrowhead's Helldivers 2, the fastest-selling PlayStation Studios game of all time, took just shy of 8 years to develop and at significant expense. It is an oversimplification to say that Concord and Suicide Squad's long developments were the root cause of their failure, although they clearly played a big part.
And again, you know, I hate having access to this information, right? Because I was told that, like, Baldur's Gate 3, like, not a single fucking person that started on that game were around when the game finished. And people see this because the third act on release was so fucking buggy. And obviously there's also design decisions that can point towards ideological slants. But you know, you also had games like, I don't know, what's a good example? The Last of Us 2, right? Where Naughty Dog had the biggest fucking turnover rate, like bigger than most other fucking retail companies. And I think that adds just time into the game because people being brought in, people need to build upon what already exists, right? And now they're fucking with the code. You know, they're adding ideology to coding. They're adding ideological idiots. People who, again, are brought on based off nepotism. They don't add to game companies, to the product, to the work environment. In fact, they make the work environment the most toxic than it has ever been. Right? You know, and again, you have Twitter, right? When Elon Musk took over Twitter and fired 80% of the people that worked there, and the user experience just changed very little. Like maybe there are a couple more bots, right? Which again, you don't have to fucking worry about. Like, and we see this in just most tech companies, most entertainment companies, right? Even completely not even like games. Like we can go into TV shows. How again, The Boys had like 15 fucking executive producers. Like, and this adds money. This adds time. This muddies the product. Right? It throws a product in 7, 8 different fucking ways. And I'm not surprised it caught. And then you have consultants like Sweet Baby that knows the consumer does not like the changes they're making. They know this, but they do it anyway because they're ideological leeches from an American university that has a degree that normally wouldn't land them the fuck anywhere. But okay, I guess they're hired based off the nepotism of others, right? And they cost money. They cost time because you have the creator of the World of Warcraft race, the Draenei, right? You know, that art style is becoming a dying art, right? There's ideological reasons why that art style is going away and why everything's switching to this, I don't know, California arts style that, you know, the Gumball TV show has, or like this inoffensive art style that you just see and you're like, okay, I could probably make this, right? All these things just they go into a product costing more money, taking more time, but being less of a fucking product.
I'm going to stop you right there. One of the biggest issues that the games industry is facing today is the fact that they are listening to journalists and analysts rather than the players.
Yeah.
And these people are telling them what they want to hear, and that's why they keep making the same mistake over and over again. You're bringing up Final Fantasy 16 in the same conversation as Star Wars Outlaws, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, and Concord? Are you out of your mind? That game sold 3 million copies in its first year, and while it didn't meet Square Enix's financial target, you're not talking about the fact that those targets were put in place because they were trying to make up for the losses that they incurred on Foam Stars and Forspoken.
Yeah.
I feel like they just say things to say things. Saying that Space Marine 2 was successful because of Warhammer, the vast majority of people that bought that game had no background with Warhammer before.
And the people that do understand the goofy ass company that's over Warhammer 40K and how they now have the ideological leeches that are changing things, changing lore, adding things. They don't make the product better, but to raise their ESG score because, let's be honest, like Games Workshop, like they produce plastic, which doesn't give you the best ESG score, right? So, and they want access to up to trillions of dollars of investor money. And I also heard that the EU is demanding companies release their ESG score metrics, which is why now CD Project Red is now embracing ESG, and now their games are going to be woke, right? And again, what is woke? The intent. Their intent is to get the ESG money, not to give you a better fucking product, right? And that is the problem. They don't want to give you a better product. They don't want to give you good games. They don't want to give you good art. They want to mass produce things, just things that they can fleece on the market and get government grants and ESG money to produce.
They said the same thing about Baldur's Gate 3 because we all know how much everybody loves Wizards of the Coast. Come on. And what is with this idea that the more money that's spent on a game and the longer its development is going to have any impact on how the market receives a game? With Concord, if they developed that game for 2 years or 20 or spent $10 or $10 billion, it wouldn't have mattered. Like Outlaws, like Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, it was a bad game, nobody wanted to play it, and nobody was ever interested in it.
Yep.
Saying that it has something to do with players moving away from a genre. Well, if that was the case, then why did Concord fail and Deadlock succeed? I'd like to know. I just don't understand why game developers and games journalists don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. They see the culprit. It's like a Scooby-Doo episode. They just feign ignorance over it. You're making games that players don't want. You're targeting audiences with a minuscule demographic of people that are actually active out there buying games in the first place. You're targeting that audience. You're targeting audiences that don't even play video games to begin with. And while I applaud you for wanting to be inclusive, you're selling skis in the desert. What?
Yeah, they're targeting almost a demographic that doesn't exist. Like, it exists on paper. It exists in theory, right? Like when Xbox wanted to become an overall entertainment console instead of a gaming console. Like, okay, they're marketing to like my mother, people who do not play games, right? And which is why now PlayStation can get away with making a $700 fucking console.
What do you expect to happen? And the best part is they're spending a lot of money doing it. Wesley continues with this.
Yeah, and again, I need to stop doing this. But people, again, if you look at the ideology, like the ideology that is now infecting games, now changing the perception of companies against the consumer, right? Calling the consumer this, that, and the other, right? It operates on wealth extraction. It thinks, oh, if you just give us more money, it will just be a better product, right? They don't operate in, fixing the product or building or, if we don't know, we can reallocate to someone who does know, right? It's wealth extraction. That's why you have companies like Sweet Baby that you just give them money, but the product isn't better. If anything, they take away. There's censors. The censorship is the fucking product, right? And you're the pay piggy because when you call it out, they morally grandstand to you, the consumer, right? It's why they use ideology to not only uplift themselves, but to defend bad fucking products.
This week, Epic Games boss Tim Sweeney said that the games industry is going through what he called a generational change that has led to some games failing to sell as well as the publishers had hoped. One of the manifestations of that change we're seeing right now is that a lot of games are released with high budgets and they're not selling as well as expected, Sweeney said, whereas other games are going incredibly strong. What we're seeing is a real trend towards players gravitating towards big games where they can play more with their friends. That reads as an ill-advised dig against single-player games, or at least their sustainability as AAA projects. Yes, Space Marine 2 and Helldivers 2 are boosted by their co-op play, but single-player games continue to sell record numbers. Just look at From Software's Elden Ring and Game Science's Black Myth Wukong, both predominantly single-player games. Willits has his own theory on what's happening. Speaking to IGN, Willits said that the problem isn't necessarily that AAA games take too long to develop and thus launch into already abandoned genres. Rather, Willits believes AAA developers are trending to overscope their games, which in turn means they fail to do any one thing brilliantly.
Yeah, again, see, that's what I'm talking about. They want to broaden the product, right? They want to make it for the broadest possible audience, right? Even if it comes at the detriment of the demographic, right? Of people who of a specific group of people that enjoys your fucking games, right? You know, they don't want to make games they don't want to think of games like genres. They want to think of them as, oh, you need a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of everything, things that do not add to the game. If anything, it takes away, because games take time, money, and effort, and anything you add will come in place of the thing that you could have added to make the game better, but you're not. You're adding aspects to the game that just, okay, might trend to this type of person, or like, name any other type of art, any other type of media that's for the wider audience, right? That has to stop being a genre and just be for everybody. And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't exist in music, right? You know, that doesn't exist in, like, I don't know, books. Again, TV shows and movies are trying to do the same thing games are doing, but it still doesn't exist. Like, you still have genres in movies and TV shows. So why do you think games being any different, right, would yield anything better? It's like,
for Space Marine 2, Willits explained Saber made sure to nail the core combat and kept a handle on the scope of the game. So much so that some have praised it for rekindling memories of the Xbox 360 era of action games. It's not necessarily that the genre has moved on, because great games will always do well, Willits said. One of the things that we try to do at Saber, and this is part of my job as creative officer of all teams, we have a core belief that what you do every second and what happens when you push these buttons and that core gameplay loop is so critical. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction in the gameplay and the feeling you have. And then,
yeah, it's okay. Does everything you do add on to your experience, right? And what we see in, like, Black Ops 6 is, well, no. Like, sometimes you'll be in a hot pursuit gunfight, but then just out of nowhere, now you're in this cutscene and you're yapping about things that have absolutely nothing to do with what you've previously done. It's like you're jumping from one continent to the other and they don't really connect, right? And what other game would fit this? Like, hell, Mass Effect Andromeda, right? Like, you had an interesting premise, but then they add so many goofy things that just doesn't benefit the experience. I think that's why Andromeda 1 is probably one of the introductions, like one of the woke games that came that to begin with, right? Because it added just so many, again, design decisions, game decisions that just don't mean anything, right? I think everyone can think of a game that just has these things, like the Saints Row Refuck, same fucking thing.
we adhere to our core pillars, like be the ultimate space marine, melee, ranged, swarms, that's it. And a lot of teams throughout development will overscope their games. They look at other games that just came out and say, oh, we gotta do that. Let's add this. We gotta do this. And they lose focus on that core, what actually makes the game fun. We're not in Space Marine 2 doing things like that. Well, the swarms are new technology, but there isn't some revolutionary gameplay mechanic no one's ever seen before. There are gameplay mechanics that people are familiar with, but we do it really, really well. And we execute really, really well. Man, I love that he brings up scope creep, because I think it's one of the more observable truths that we have when we look at the collapse of Ubisoft. Year over year, as they've continued to release the exact same titles, they have continued to pollute the core experience of why players were playing those games in the first place. Look at Ghost Recon as an example. A game that started out as a third-person competitive shooter with a campaign would eventually suffer from constant shifts in approach and gameplay, before vaulting the competitive shooter portion of the franchise entirely after their attempt to make a pay-to-win, free-to-play Ghost Recon Phantoms, and ultimately turn it into an open-world pseudo-looter shooter.
Yeah, with microtransactions and gear score. and skill progression, like and level up system. Like every game nowadays has these. Like it has in some open world, it has craftability and upgrading. Like it has things that are added that okay, they take the form of mechanics, but if you look at them, it's like okay, so why is this here? Like all this does is just add bloat onto a game that, on its own 2 feet, right? If it had a good narrative direction, that could have carried the game alone. But no, it has crafting. It has gear score that if you fall under, you can't progress. It has microtransactions that fundamentally messes with the game and forces you to actually buy into them to progress, right? It has goofy cosmetics, you know, and it's like, okay, so if this is where we're going, where games need to have all these sorts of things, right? You know, what makes, say, the Ghost Recon game any different than another game that has all these things, like Once Human? Now, Once Human, I don't think fits this description, and I think Once Human's an okay game, right? And again, every game has a season pass, every game has season progression, and some goofy premium currency, some funny money so you don't feel bad for spending $10. It's like you're not spending $10. You're exchanging $10 to get $10 worth of global coin, and you're spending the global coin to get this. Like every game has this now, right? And some games have them and they're good, but you see so many AAA games effectively suffering from the same problems that mobile games had, like Clash of Clans had, with gyms and progression and leaderboards and all that. Like, and this point, it's like, and Clash of Clans is free, right? I'm spending $70 for a mobile game that others would just be free. But now mobile games are giving you what you want. So it's like, it's just an odd shift in creative direction in gaming.
Assassin's Creed has gone through the exact same issues, losing its identity, gaining RPG mechanics, and turning more of it into an action game than a stealth game. What's happening to these studios is a textbook case of identity lost, caused by chasing trends instead of refining the things that made their games great in the first place, or, in the case of some of their new IPs, copying their competition without finding their own identity. Space Marine 2 succeeded because it was a great game sold at a fair price. It's as simple as that. It reminded players of the Xbox 360 era of action games because it was just a fun game. It had tight controls, the narrative was compelling, the characters were compelling, the action on screen, these moments of spectacle. It was just a fun and wild ride, and you didn't feel like you needed to be married to it. It didn't feel like the game needed to try to do too much. They didn't pad out the game time by putting in collectibles and other side quests and things like that, from keeping you from progressing and making sure you're putting in as many hours as you possibly can into the game. It didn't pop up immediately with a battle pass menu the minute that you started the game up. It's not doing these things that players don't want in games. That's the reason why the game is successful. It's just a damn good video game, and that's it.
Oh, it's not that, people don't want. Because what is like the season pass thing? Well, it just gives you more things for doing things in the game. Like, I don't know. Like, I'll use the Nightwave for Warframe as an example, right? Like, okay, you get certain amount of points for killing enemies while airborne, or you get a certain amount of points for doing a sortie, or for completing 5 missions on Steel Path, right? And it takes 10,000 points to actually level up. So, okay, let's say the 5 Steel Path gives you 700 points, and I don't know, the killing 100 enemies give you 1,000, and I don't know, you fish and get an extra 2,000, right? And at the end when you level up, you just get, and you with the pass, you get, I don't know, a free slots or free cosmetics, or maybe if you already have the thing, it just gives you the credits, and with the credits you can then go into that store and buy whatever the fuck you want if you have enough. Again, I don't care just being rewarded for playing the game, because I know I'm going to keep playing the fucking game, right? And Nikkei Gods of Victory and Zanless Zone Zero does the same thing, right? But these games also just give you free shit. Like, you're giving so much free shit that you even feel bad for not paying, and these are free games, right? Like, I want to give Zaneless Zone Zero my money, but because of the fraud thing that my bank account has, and it's like, oh, what, you're making a purchase in Korea? What the fuck? No. It keeps me from giving them my fucking money. But I mean, I pulled Bernice anyway, so I guess that's fine. But I want to tip this game. It is a good game. I enjoy the game, right? And most games like this, like good games, people will gladly just give money towards, right? So you don't have to make a game $70 or $120 something dollars, or I'm sorry, $160 something to get the premium gold booty hole edition that has the season pass cut content that should already have been in the game, but we're shelving it just for you to pay, or shitty fucking cosmetics or collectors. Like, you don't have to do that, because if the game can stand on its two fucking feet, you don't need any of that, right?
Players loved it because it's a memory of what the industry used to be, back when they used to appreciate the players and when the players used to appreciate the games that were being made for them. Games that were out there that were respecting our time, respecting our money, and more than anything, trying to actually earn that money. And Space Marine 2 is one of those games that earns your money. This idea that you need to read tea leaves about why games are successful, how these games are successful. I think one of the reasons why players are so upset today, why you're seeing so much vitriol in the games industry, is because players are frustrated that we're seeing so many of these games that are more or less these patronized versions of what C-suite executives believe our tastes are. This is what they think of us. That's what they're putting out there, and it's offensive.
Yeah, that and the ideology, right? I don't know if he really talks about the ideological bent, but it is an aspect, right, of morally grandstanding over complete fucking strangers and using the ideology to push back on, like you see this with Star Wars The Acolyte or the Star Wars Outlaws, right? Like, they use ideology as a shield, then any type of pushback is against the ideology, and you're a this is and you're a that is, or you're a insert morally charged label here ist. And again, if people don't fucking care for that shit, like, people aren't even being mad. People are just not buying the product. People are like, okay, if you want to dump hundreds of $1,000,000 on a game that people aren't going to buy, well, then fine, I'll just take my money towards other things. And again, this will kickstart the silver age of gaming. It might not be the golden age, right? But I think it'll be close to that. Like, we'll get back to the point where we're having maybe not as many bangers, but just bangers in general. And we're headed towards that. And again, it could be in the next 2, 3, 4 years, right? It could be, hell, next year. Who knows? But we're getting there.
The KOTOR remake is in incredible hands. Saber gets it. I'm so happy to read this. I'm so happy I played their last game. I know a lot of people are really worried about the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake, but man, I'm all on board, baby. I'm all on board. I'm not going to pre-order it, but I think you're going to do a good job. It has nothing to do with how many people are working on a game. It doesn't matter what genre it's in. It doesn't matter about anything else other than, does the game respect my time and money? Does it earn my money? Is it fun to play? And that's why Space Marine 2 succeeded. Helldivers 2 proved that you could make a game and reach wide audiences with a horde shooter. Baldur's Gate 3 broke records, a lot of records, as a turn-based game. And there are a ton of other examples that are out there that are just like that, proving a lot of the industry wrong and showing that they don't understand what we actually want. The article continues with, then there's the question of development cost, which pretty much every AAA publisher has said risen sharply once again with the launch of the latest generation of consoles. Development costs, Willits said, have gotten so out of control that some AAA games, especially those in the US states such as California, now have unreasonable sales expectations set against their budgets. Saber, Willits insisted, developed Space Marine 2 affordably, with a budget less than half of Doom Eternal, the last game Willits worked on while boss of id Software before leaving to join Saber in 2019. We don't need to sell 4 million units to make Space Marine 2 a success, Willits said. There are many games, sadly, especially out of North American developers, where if you do not sell 5 million copies, you're a failure. I mean, what business are we in where you fail if you sell less than 5 million? There are examples like that, and we don't want to be that business. We want to be the developer that focuses on the core experience, what makes games actually fun, and do it really well and make it affordably.
Yeah, it's like, what industry do you live in if you sell 5 million copies and it's a failure? Well, if you're a multi-billion-dollar company and say your game's like $70 and you expect infinite growth, your stockholders expect infinite growth, and now you hit this point where, okay, it just can't happen, right? Even if you sell 5 million copies, you still fall short because you're a bloated multi-billion-dollar company, right? Yeah, like that's where you live, all right? And maybe that's the problem, right? And plus you got to pay off the consultants. You got to suck in government. This is probably why they're trying to go for the ESG and government grants, because they know they don't have faith in the company and the product, so they're trying to get goofy money from, grants, and that's why they hire consultants. Because once you hire the consultants, I see you can make it whatever game you want, and no one will shit on you because they're connected with the game journalists. But you see this with games across the pond, from like Japanese games, South Korean games, Chinese games, that they're not. So it's like this ideological mafia that's like, oh, I see you don't have a woman within the first 2 chapters of your game, Black Myth Wukong. It looks like sexism to me. It looks like sexism. And it's like, bitch, shut the fuck up, right? You're the type of person that only plays 5 fucking minutes of the game. You can't even get past the fucking tutorial, right? Like, you won't even get to the 3rd chapter, let alone the fucking 2nd chapter, right? So what the fuck? And again, this is the tactics that are being employed. And again, it all goes back to wealth extraction. Like, they want to extract wealth from these companies, from companies across the seas, and if they don't, then they attack the product. Fuck.
Look at SnowRunner, dude. SnowRunner is literally driving trucks through mud. That's it. I'm done. I just described the game. 15 million people played it because the experience was perfect. Look at World War Z. Like, come on. We're not going to get an Academy Award for the game, but 25 million people have played it because it's just this perfectness. And that's what we do well. Even with Willits' overscoped argument, there are exceptions to the rule. Consider Baldur's Gate 3, which, including its successful early access period, was in the works for around 6 years before its record-breaking launch in 2023. Predominantly single-player and with a Rockstar-level nonsense for scope, as one developer put it. What is to make of all of this? Perhaps all we can say is that video game development is super hard and not an exact science. If it were, every game would be successful. Willits had previously told IGN the success of Space Marine 2 changes everything for Saber and would even positively affect its future projects. While neither Saber nor Focus have announced sales figures for Space Marine 2, Focus has confirmed over 2 million played at launch. In fact, Space Marine 2 is the most played Warhammer video game of any type ever released on Steam, with 225,690 peak concurrent players on Valve's platform. Willits won't go into hard numbers for Space Marine 2's success, either in revenue or in profit terms, but He has gone on record saying that Space Marine 2 is the fastest selling game he's ever worked on, and that includes Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein, and the Rage games id Software released over the 24 years he was at the studio.
Yeah, and again, that's the consumer mindset, the consumer values is good games existed in the past. We've worked on good projects in the past, right? Why do we need to erase the past? Why do we need to erase games that happened before just to fit the sensibility of current mindset and current corporate and current ideological mindsets of people who, again, don't play games, don't know the first fucking thing about making a game, right? But they only know either ideology or they only know how, I don't know, how to, the salesman or their upper middle management that don't actually, that gets paid regardless of what happens to the game, right? Why do we need to listen to those types of people or journalists that are becoming this ideological class, claiming to speak on behalf of the gamer, but if anything, they shit on the gamer, they shit on the consumer, right? Because they're, I don't know, middle-aged Western white women with a gender studies degrees. Like, why do we need to listen to those types of people, right? You know why Nikke got us a victory? Why, like, Snowbreaker Containment Zone, right? Why Zaneless Zone Zero popular? Because they asked their fucking fans, they asked the fucking consumer what they want. And if the consumer says, we want ass, you give them fucking ass, right? If the consumer's like, we want titties, you give them fucking titties, right? Do you want to make money? Or do you want to push a fringe American ideology that not even all Americans care for or agree with? Or if they do, they don't employ it, right? They just hear and they're like, okay, yeah, that sounds fine. Can you give me a good game now? No, we can't because our ideology says we can't, right? Oh, okay, well, I'm sorry. I guess you can take someone else's money because you're not getting mine. Like,
I genuinely was trying to read this article without being critical of the writer, but please, for God's sakes, when you have someone like Willis that's bringing such incredible talking points to the table, could you try to think critically or deliver something of value? Seriously, what's to make of this? Maybe game development is super hard and not an exact science? The man just told you what the problem is, and the discussion flew over your head. Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't an exception to the rule. It was a game that was developed over the course of 6 years, but they only spent $100 million. Sven Vinke, the lead behind Baldur's Gate 3, shed some light on this in an interview with GameSpot.
You need to make sure you have enough fuel to do it. Yeah. That's probably the biggest one. I mean, like, we had reserve fuel based on the success of the original Sin 2 to engage with this. We upscaled our ambitions when we saw the success in early access. Right. So we would have not done that if we would have seen that early access wasn't as successful. So yeah. I think the most important lesson for us is how important dashboarding is, so you can actually see your fuel meter, so you don't run out of money and you don't get into trouble, because it does remain the fuel that you need to make your game. If you do it at the scale that we do it, with the amount of level of permutations, the amount of immersion gameplay, you're going to run into trouble. Guaranteed. Yeah. So that means that you need to have reserves.
Larian saw the success of Divinity Original Sin 2, and they based their projections off of what it did. They were conservative. They put out an early access model of Baldur's Gate 3. They saw all the support they were getting from their fans, and then they chose to upscale based on that level of support and the financial support that they received through sales. Not only did this lead to them being more financially responsible, but it helped them hyper-focus on the things that mattered the most to players who bought the game during early access, and they stayed true to that vision, just like Space Marine 2. And they just refined those core elements of the game to be able to reflect what customers wanted. There's nothing wrong with scoping out your game, but Baldur's Gate 3 scoped out individual mechanics, not necessarily the activities. Ubisoft has forced RPG mechanics, levels, XP, randomized loot, multiple choice outcomes, and more into all of their games, diluting the experience that players are coming to their games for. Larian Studios, on the other hand, said, "We want to make choices matter in our RPG," and they fleshed out those individual narrative paths for players to play in each scenario. They didn't add a bunch of extra bells and whistles and useless crap to try to make the game look big. They made the game feel big. I feel like
they didn't add a bunch of just design and decisions. Well, they had a couple of design decisions that I look at, I'm like, fuck that. But they didn't add just mechanics. They didn't add things to their game to make it not less of what it was, right? But, okay, they put more money, more manpower, and it costs more to make and more time. Therefore, this is what you get. Like, they put just what they needed. And, again, they built upon previous successes and previous, I guess, previous mechanics. Because, again, the whole D&D, like, of Divinity was a thing, that whole system. And they built upon that, right? But at the end of the day, it had good gameplay, right? It had the same mechanics. It had, an okay story. I mean, and that's why the game was successful. Well, mainly because it brought in normies, which is fine. But they didn't try to even reach the wider audience. They just happened because it was a good game.
A lot of this just comes down to overblown budgets and too many employees. Starfield cost $200 to $400 million to make. Spider-Man 2 was $300 million to make. Diablo 4 had over 9,000 people working on it. Star Wars Outlaws likely cost $200 to $300 million and had over 600 developers working on it. None of these games reflect the money that was invested nor the amount of people that were working on them. In fact, it's likely the reason why these games aren't meeting their financial targets. It's also the reason that these games are failing to meet audience expectations.
Yeah, and you wonder why do these games cost so much, right? Like, where in the development process did all of a sudden 20 million, 200 million just go out? Maybe it was the consultants, right? Maybe they're, again, paying off people that added nothing to the game. Maybe they're just an over-bloated, multi-billion-dollar company, right? Maybe they're just paying off people that got hired on based off ideological nepotism and their names down, but they didn't add anything, right? Like, these are questions people are asking, like, why do you demand $120 something fucking dollars for me for a product that does not reflect what I want to play? And why am I being attacked for not playing it?
Too many cooks in the kitchen, too many ideas, too many ideologies, too many managers to get anything approved, and too many people to get anything done within a reasonable amount of time. Black Myth Wukong cost $43 million to make and was made by 140 employees. Baldur's Gate 3 had 450 employees and a budget of $100 million. Space Marine 2 likely had 200 developers or less and cost around the same. These games didn't succeed because they had massive budgets and thousands of employees. They succeeded because they spent less to make more. They didn't hire for numbers, they hired for talent. They didn't employ employees, they employed artists. They had a clear vision for what the players wanted to make, and they delivered it. Just make it make sense to me. You made Concord, which cost you $400 million, and you made it to appeal to an audience, its identity as a product, because you made your characters a certain way, and you had a very specific image that you were going for, and you had the whole movie thing that was attached to it. That game was made for a minority of beliefs within the consumer base. This isn't about social politics or anything like that. I'm just talking raw numbers. These are not opinions or ideologies that are held by the vast majority of consumers. You say that you want to target wider audiences, casual audiences, people that don't even play video games, but the things that you're making don't even appeal to those people in the first place. So what are you doing? And why are you going to act surprised when your game releases and you sell it to the realistic amount of people that you should see for sales for a game like that? They sold 25,000 copies. That's pretty realistic for that game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll make it make sense because the game wasn't meant for you. The game is not meant for gamers. It was meant for ESG. It was meant for government grants. It was meant to extract wealth from Sony. And I guess in that case, it was a success, right? Even though, again, barely hundreds of people kept playing the game, right? But again, for the initial attempt of why the game existed, it succeeded, right? That's why I give the game a 0 out of 10. Because it's like, if they're not going to put in time to make a game for me, I don't even care how good the game or how functionally the game was. If it's not for me, like, why would I take the time to grade it? It's like 0 out of 10. Next.
This comes down to something that I brought up in a previous video, and I do truly believe this. I think that what ended up happening in the video game industry, and the reason why it's suffering so much right now, is that in the race to scale up, because the game industry exploded. It's now the biggest entertainment industry in the entire world. It makes more money than movies, television, and music put together.
And that's the problem, right? The problem was when it became popular. But I guess it was inevitable because there was the push to say, make Marvel appeal to, I don't know, single women in their 20s and 30s with Thor, right? You had TV shows like The Big Bang Theory that made nerds appealing. You had a lot of like American Pie shows where the nerds grow the fuck up and it's like, okay, maybe they're not just these outcasts, maybe they're okay. Like, there was this push to make gaming, which was for kids when my mother grew up, and push it into mainstream, and it worked. But when this happened, the leeches, the corporate interests, the ideological interests came in, and that's kind of where we are now, right?
In that scale up, with all that investor money that came in, all of these companies had to show that they were growing. And the best way for them to show that they're growing, because it takes a while to make a video game, is to expand and hire more employees and start more projects, because that's what investors want to see. They want to see how you're scaling up. How are you growing and getting bigger? What are you using my money for? They want to see that reflected. And doing that, they weren't out there hiring talent. They were just hiring warm bodies. That's all that they wanted. And as a result, they hired on a ton of these talentless NPCs that 90% of their life is based on what's happening on the internet.
Yep.
And they think what's reflecting in the screen of this device here or on your computer monitors is what you see in real life. And it's just not true. The opinions that you see shared on the internet, the beliefs that you see shared on the internet, are not how people react in real life, and it's also not how people make decisions on what they're going to buy and what they're not going to buy.
Consumer value.
It's just not how life works. How many times have you said or seen somebody say something online and do something completely different? Because the online personality is not the real personality. Everybody knows this. The issue that they have now is that they've scaled up, they've hired on all of these people, they have too many employees, so now their projects are taking longer to make because you have too many ideas, you have too many people you have to talk to get anything approved, you have a lack of talent, which makes it even more difficult for you to be able to get projects done on time, which then ends up costing you even more money. You keep pumping that money in, the game comes out, it fails, now you're desperate for more money, so you try to spend more to fix your issues, and you have the same problem happen again. Rinse and repeat. And that's what we've been seeing in the industry. And this is going to be the one thing that game developers are not going to want to hear me say, but it's the damn truth. There needs to be more layoffs. These companies need to downsize insanely. And while that sucks for the financial, the financial stability of the people that are working there, and while in a lot of cases the vast majority of them are not going to deserve those kind of things, you do find other work, and in a lot of cases other studios are going to be hiring on people, or they find jobs in other life moves on, man. I got laid off. I've been laid off a couple times. I've lost jobs in the past. It happens to everybody. You just find a way.
Yeah, and the developers can come together, make their own studio, make games that the consumer wants, because again, it is very soul crushing when someone who doesn't know the first fucking thing about, say, art and design, telling you that, no, you cannot make this because of ideological reasons that aren't reflected in the consumer, right? You know the consumer will buy what you make and the art you make, but you're not supposed to do it because of an ideological leech that works above you, that don't add to the product, tells you not to, right? And you have a situation where they just treat it like any old job, right? Like a dev's just going to treat it like any old job. You get that paycheck and go home. And it's easy to demand they throw themselves on the sword, right? But as we see, the consumer is just not buying these products. And I mean, it does suck when people lose job, and it sucks. But if you put yourself in a position where you're an over-bloated multi-billion-dollar company and you have to stick to what is safe, what will guarantee you money instead of taking risks, like I kind of agree. Yeah, maybe layoffs need to happen. Maybe people who do not add to the process of making games, making art, they're hired on for ideological nepotism or to cover the company's ass. You know, because the ideological individual is hard to work with, because they look for reasons to get lawsuits. They look for reasons to fire people that don't agree with them or don't act like them, or in some cases don't look like them. They are the things they claim to be against, right? Like, you have these situations where someone's just hired as a censor who maybe just does a couple of emails but get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars and makes the product worse, right?
That's just how life is. And in the case of these companies, if they don't figure something out to turn things around, they're going to be in a lot of trouble in the next few years, especially in the next 5 or 10 years. And it makes it even more difficult because they're so big and bloated, it takes too long for them to correct their issues. Because even if you do downscale your company and you do start paying attention to the talent that you're hiring and the leadership that you're hiring, and you get a clear vision on what you want to make, well, it doesn't matter because it's still going to take you 4 to 6 years to be able to make a video game. And that's a long time not to be making money. So I don't know what the overall solution to this issue is, but I think that the Space Marine 2 developer did a really good job of bringing up why games are failing. And he's pretty spot on. A lot of these games just don't have the identity. They just aren't entertaining. They're just games that aren't made for the players.
Yeah.
And when you're making games that aren't made for people that are playing video games, well, they're not going to buy it. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure to like, subscribe, share the video to your friends. You guys can join the Discord. Discord link is in the description of the video. Make sure that you guys come and follow me on Twitch. Catch me live. Hear me rant about video games, play video games, and things like that. Outside of that, my friends, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Yeah. Again, is there a solution to this? I mean, solutions are happening as we speak, right? Like, people are just not buying the product, and, you know, if you're at these companies, it's like you have to ride the waves. Sometimes they're cool and clear, sometimes they're rough and rugged, and there's a chance the ship sinks. But I mean, you're in this position, you have to ride it. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. Space Marine 2 was successful because of Warhammer 40k, and Star Wars Outlaws have been an absolute banger. Should have, but again, the ideological individuals did everything in their power to erode the Star Wars brand, and they're happy that the Star Wars is a failure. They look me in the eyes and be like, we are happy that you do not like Star Wars anymore. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I'll be happy if you lose your job. Like, there is malice behind Star Wars yet, like these projects. Space Marine 2 is what's got me into Warhammer 40k universe, not the other way around. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was into the 40k universe before Space Marine 2, but yeah, Space Marine 2 is really the reason I am. Devs Make Your Game Journal. That's where he's trying to say something. Yeah. Hell on Bungie Arrows made so well because the team was just the right size and where internal communications between departments was functional. Marty Composer said as much. Smaller scale meant they could iron out graphics and gameplay with equal levels of love and attention, and it is why Halo 3 is borderline timeless. Their talent was retained to achieve that. The lesson learned in Halo 1 and 2 development Modern corporations don't take any time to understand what used to work, and so an ingredient like this is seen in Halo isn't seen in Halo anymore. And it's no surprise how quick the IP falls off as a result. It seems so simple to reopen the rulebook for the Xbox 360 business plan and get their sterile series console and lackluster releases are exciting enough. Again, you can't go back to the era of this. There are people in place that will not allow you to make good games. That's the problem, right? There are people whose entire jobs exist to effectively make Halo a worse product. And if you try to do that, these people will be mad. AAA games, games are hard, guys. We want your money. Space Marine 2, get good. Yes. Yes. And it's odd because these AAA game companies used to be what Halo, the company that made Halo, used to just a couple dudes in their mom's fucking basement that wants to make a good game, right? IGN Warhammer 40k Season 2 dev won't say rather imposing morals on games. YouTube comment is from its CEO. Warhammer says big budget games are falling in part because teams are over-scoping their project. Yes. I mean, you also have journalists that will just, for some reason, if you try to make a product for gamers, they will attack you. They try to discredit the CEO for their comment, then they interview the dev who essentially echoed the CEO's comment, and the conclusion they came to was the game development is super hard. In 4 weeks, they went from trying to bring negative attention to a successful studio to asking a dev from the studio how their product was so successful, and then proceed to completely miss the point of the interview. Incredibly, yes. Again, if it's not ideology, if it's not them filtering what is being said through their ideological lens and trying to misconstrue it, I don't know what the fuck it is. You need some sort of custom smug face emote for when you use a specific example while talking about a topic and the exact example comes up in an article like a paragraph later. It seems to happen a lot, yes. Space Marine 2 Based Marine 2. Hell yeah, brother. But anyway, I'm calling it right now. We're entering the Silver Age of gaming. Right? Cringe name, but that's why I'm fucking going with it. But anyway, peace.